The man was getting ready to leave for work, but his dog was acting very strangely, as if it had sensed something bad was about to happen, desperately trying to stop him from going out. First, the dog barked loudly at its owner. When the man, worried, walked toward it, the dog kept backing away. After checking, the man didn't find anything unusual, but this sudden behavior also raised some suspicion in his wife. As the dog Hachi stood motionless in the yard, Parker, anxious to get to work, said goodbye to his wife Kate and headed out alone. With something on its mind, Hachi quickly ran back to its kennel, grabbed the toy ball it used to hate the most, and dashed out the door. When Parker arrived at the train station, Hachi came panting after him with the ball in its mouth. To Parker's surprise, Hachi obediently played a game of fetch with him this time, as if trying to make him stay through this game. Parker happily showed off to the station manager Carl and the hot dog stand owner Justjeet, saying this was the first time his dog had ever successfully fetched the ball. Yet he didn't notice Hachi's odd behavior. After agreeing to meet Hachi at 5 o'clock at the station, Parker cheerfully walked into the station. Unable to speak, the dog could only bark again and again at Parker from behind, its barks full of reluctance and worry. But Parker had already boarded his train to work, leaving Hachi standing anxiously on the platform, watching the train disappear into the distance, as if silently praying for his safe return. Yet that goodbye would be their last moment together. Hachi was once an unidentified stray Akita dog, and no one had ever known its mysterious origins. It had been transported all the way from faraway Japan to America, enduring a long and exhausting journey. During the long trip, it had been locked inside a small cage, weak and helpless, observing a world that was completely unfamiliar. Unfortunately, due to the carelessness of the staff, the cage accidentally fell to the ground during transport. Amid the noise of the crowd, no one noticed this incident, and the staff kept moving ahead. The cage, now broken from the fall, gave Hachi a chance to push its way out through the gap. Inside the bustling train station, no one noticed this little puppy that had lost its way. No one knows how long it wandered, but eventually the crowd thinned, and Hachi saw a man on the phone. It was Parker, a musician returning late from work, dressed smartly in a suit, with a kind and gentle smile on his face. That smile seemed like a ray of hope, lighting up Hachi's confused and anxious heart. It seemed to decide this man was its savior, and sat down in front of him. Parker bent down and scooped the little dog into his arms. Maybe because of the fine leather collar around Hachi's neck, he thought it had simply gotten lost at the train station. Standing on the platform, Parker looked around. But besides him and the little dog, there was no one else by the cold tracks. Carefully carrying Hachi's cage, Parker took the dog to the station manager Carl's office, hoping Carl could help keep it until its owner came to claim it. But the usually friendly Carl looked troubled and admitted that he couldn't take the dog in. He suggested Parker bring it home for now, and if someone came looking, Carl would let him know. Parker insisted on leaving the dog at the station, believing the owner would surely come. After several refusals, Carl finally said he could only keep the dog for one night. If no one claimed it, the dog would have to be sent to an animal shelter. Facing Carl's firmness, Parker began to worry about the dog's situation and finally decided to take it home temporarily. On the way, Parker talked to himself softly, his fondness for the puppy obvious. But when he reached the house, he tiptoed in, trying to avoid his wife, and quietly settled the dog in an empty room downstairs. Parker repeatedly told the puppy not to run around. Just as he was about to close the door, Kate suddenly came downstairs to greet him, pulling him aside with a mysterious smile, saying she had a secret to tell him. Before Parker could confess about the dog, they happily went upstairs with wine glasses in hand. Meanwhile, the mischievous puppy jumped off the bed and stepped on the piano pedals in the room. Kate noticed the noise. A nervous Parker quickly explained that it was just branches scraping against the window. But the puppy wasn't done yet. It managed to open the door and ran up to the second floor, straight to Parker's bedside. At that moment, Parker and his wife were enjoying a sweet moment under the covers when the puppy suddenly interrupted, gently licking Kate's foot. Kate's scream echoed through the whole house. Terrified, she sat up and angrily scolded her husband, warning him not to even think about keeping the dog. It turned out they had once owned a dog before, and Kate couldn't bear to plant another seed of sadness in her heart. Parker helplessly promised he would take the puppy away, first thing in the morning. Then he settled the puppy in the wooden house in the yard, laid out its bed, filled the water bowl, and left a light on for the puppy before leaving. Under the dim light, the puppy watched Parker's departing figure, its face full of grievance and longing. The next morning, Parker's daughter Andy fell in love with the unexpected puppy at first sight, even asking her mother to take a photo of her and the puppy together. Andy kept begging her father to keep the dog. She tearfully recalled how empty the house had felt since their last dog passed away. While father and daughter were lost in dreams about this puppy, Kate pulled out a stack of missing dog posters and told them to go out and post them. Though Parker was reluctant, he still took the puppy to the animal shelter. Just then, he happened to run into one of the staff members. Parker asked if the puppy could stay at the shelter until its owner was found. Before he could finish speaking, the staff member coldly replied that the shelter didn't offer boarding services and was already short on space. Even if they took the puppy in, it could only stay for a maximum of 2 weeks. After careful thought, Parker decided to take the puppy away from the shelter. He went to his friend Mary's bookstore and asked if she could do him a favor and post the missing dog notice on her shop window. When the puppy poked its head out from Parker's backpack, Mary was instantly charmed by the little one's cuteness. But unexpectedly, the bookstore cat was very hostile toward the puppy and even swatted it hard. Worried, Parker had no choice but to take the puppy somewhere else again. He carried the puppy to the hot dog stand. During their chat, Parker casually asked Jasjeet if he'd be willing to take the dog. Jasjeet jokingly replied that he preferred money, then listed all the inconveniences of having a dog. Still unwilling to give up, Parker returned to the train station to ask Carl if anyone had come looking for the dog. The answer once again left him disappointed. Despite that, he insisted that Carl at least post the missing dog notice. Then, ignoring Carl's warning about not bringing dogs on the train, Parker quietly tucked the puppy into his backpack and boarded the train. He split his breakfast in two and, while the passengers weren't watching, secretly fed the puppy. The puppy followed Parker into his classroom. It wandered freely among the students' feet during dance practice and lay down to rest when it was tired. Parker asked each student if they wanted to adopt the puppy, but it led nowhere. Parker brought the tattered piece of paper he had found on the dog crate to the home of his Japanese friend, Ken. The paper seemed to hold clues about the puppy's origins. Parker asked Ken about the information on the paper. Ken told him this wasn't just any dog. It was an Akita, a symbol of luck and loyalty. The collar around its neck had the number 8 on it, which might very well be its name, Hachi. When Parker asked Ken if he wanted to adopt the dog, Ken's meaningful words seemed to hint that Hachi and Parker were already connected by fate.
Whether you found him or he found you,
who's to say? It's meant to be.
Ken's words gave Parker a mysterious sense of strength deep inside. Later at home, while chatting with Kate, Parker accidentally called the puppy by the name Hachi. Kate immediately noticed something was off. She concluded that since Parker had already given the dog a name, he must have made up his mind to adopt it. But Parker repeatedly denied having any such intention. During their argument, Parker suddenly noticed that Hachi wasn't around. At that moment, Hachi was in another room making a mess. Hachi had torn apart one of Kate's painstakingly completed projects, leaving it in shreds. Kate was completely furious and ordered that Hachi was never to set paw in the house again. Hachi seemed to realize its mistake and quietly lay in the doghouse without making a sound, peeking through the crack in the door toward Parker's room. Outside, the wind howled. The sound of Parker and Kate arguing echoed like the banging of the wooden door, pounding on Hachi's heart. But thinking of Hachi, Parker still brought it back inside. Since he had just argued with his wife, he didn't dare go upstairs. Instead, he stayed in the study with Hachi, looking up information about Akitas. Parker settled Hachi in the living room and was about to go upstairs when the clingy Hachi started softly whining in protest. To cover up its whining, Parker turned on the TV and used watching baseball as an excuse to nap on the couch with Hachi. Hearing the TV, Kate came downstairs to check. By then, Parker was already asleep, cuddling Hachi. When Kate picked up the remote to turn off the TV, Hachi gently licked her hand. Perhaps that warm little gesture melted Kate's heart, and she allowed Parker to let Hachi sleep in the living room. At dawn, Parker was in the yard teaching Hachi to play fetch, but Hachi kept running past the ball toward other spots. Andy and Parker had a great time playing with Hachi in the yard. Watching this warm scene, Kate eventually hung up the phone call with someone who had wanted to adopt the dog. From that moment on, Hachi officially became part of Parker's family. As time passed, Hachi grew into a big dog and always wanted to be near Parker. One day, Hachi dug a hole in the yard and ran off to Parker's usual train station. When it appeared by the train window, Parker was both surprised and delighted. He quickly got off the train and called for Hachi to go back home. With the train about to depart, Parker lovingly brought Hachi home and filled in the hole in the yard. He warned Hachi not to dig holes and escape again, then left the house once more, leaving Kate tending to the garden. Hachi looked at the busy woman in front of him and rolled onto his back in a playful gesture. Unable to resist Hachi's cuteness, Kate fed it treats piece by piece. Afterward, she went back inside. Hachi lay alone in the yard, staring idly at the wall in front of it. Suddenly, it heard the distant sound of a train whistle. The next moment, it jumped onto the small cart by the wall and leapt over the fence. It sprinted down the road and arrived at the station in no time, eagerly sitting by the flower bed waiting for Parker to arrive. Finally, when that familiar face appeared, Hachi ran straight into his arms. This touching scene was witnessed by Carl and the hot dog stand owner, both of whom, even Carl, who had never cared much for dogs, couldn't help but admire Hachi's cuteness and loyalty. Parker brought Hachi home, deeply moved and amazed. That day, Parker's daughter brought her boyfriend Michael home. As Michael enthusiastically talked about music to impress his future father-in-law, Parker interrupted him and directly asked a sharp question.
Michael, do you love my daughter?
Yes, sir. Yes, I do.
Well, that's good. Because that's what you want to remember on the bad days.
Parker got the answer he wanted, and at last, a smile appeared on his usually serious face. The tense Michael finally breathed a sigh of relief. Parker introduced Hachi to Michael, which meant that deep down, Parker had truly accepted Michael. Trying to lighten the mood, Michael invited Hachi to play fetch, but Hachi remained indifferent, and Michael ended up taking a big tumble. As for the mystery of why Hachi never fetched the ball, Parker got his answer from his friend Ken. Ken told Parker that Akitas were not a breed that tried to please humans. The reason Hachi came to the station every day to greet Parker was because of a deep, unspoken bond between them. And unless there was an extremely special reason, Akitas almost never played fetch. And Ken's words also planted a seed for what was to come later in the story. The next day, Parker said goodbye to Hachi as usual before heading out. Hachi looked at him with pitiful eyes. In the end, Parker couldn't resist and let Hachi walk with him to the station. As soon as Parker entered the station, Hachi obediently went back home, even receiving snacks from shopkeepers along the way. At 5 o'clock, the train slowly pulled in. The moment Parker walked out of the station, he eagerly scooped Hachi into his arms. This kind of routine had gone on for years. They walked together across the scorching summer tracks, and they had also run joyfully through thick snow on their way home. Time flew by. Andy and Michael held their wedding, and as a family member, Hachi was included in their group photo. Without realizing it, Hachi had become a part of the Parker family's many beautiful memories. One day when Parker arrived at the station after work, he was ready to embrace Hachi as usual, but when he pushed open the station door, the familiar figure wasn't in the flower bed. Anxious, Parker ran to where his wife worked, but she said she hadn't seen Hachi since morning. Seeing his wife immersed in work, Parker returned home alone, anxiously calling out for Hachi, and finally found it in the garage, cornered by a skunk. What followed was a comical skunk-chasing scene between man and dog.
Get out of here.
Parker signaled for Hachi to leave first, but Hachi leapt and knocked him over onto the ground. In the end, both Parker and Hachi were hit by the skunk's noxious spray. That evening, when Kate returned home, she walked in to find clothes scattered all over the floor. She rushed upstairs, following the sounds, and pinched her nose as she opened the bathroom door. It turned out Parker was bathing with Hachi in a tub of tomato juice to get rid of the smell. In the end, both man and dog were banished to sleep in the living room, but wasn't that a kind of warmth too? Soon after, Andy came home with a surprise. She announced that she was pregnant. Excited, she ran to the yard to tell her father the good news. Parker was massaging Hachi at the time. Learning he was about to become a grandfather, he joyfully stopped what he was doing and embraced his daughter, walking with her back into the house. From the doghouse, Hachi watched them thoughtfully, as if it already knew about the coming arrival of its little master. One day, Andy visited her mother at the theater where she worked. The two reminisced about her mother's relationship with Parker. Andy told her mother that even after 25 years of marriage, her father still cherished the memory of their first date. Unlike Parker, who was always expressive with love, Kate tended to be more reserved. She advised her daughter not to hold back like she had, and to act on her feelings. When Kate returned home and pushed open the door, she found a mess, clothes carelessly tossed on the stairs. It was just like the scene after the skunk incident. Worried, she called out for her husband and hurried upstairs. When she opened the bathroom door, she found it beautifully decorated with candles, and a romantic atmosphere filled the room. Parker appeared with red wine, and they enjoyed a heartfelt conversation together. Before bed, Parker repeatedly expressed his love for Kate. The mood was light and happy. It felt like they were newlyweds again. But out in the yard, Hachi seemed a little uneasy. The next morning, as Parker prepared to leave for work, Hachi acted strangely. Instead of happily seeing him off as usual, it tried everything to stop him from going. Though puzzled, Parker checked and saw nothing wrong with Hachi, so he left anyway. Seeing its master insist on leaving, Hachi frantically ran into its doghouse and grabbed the baseball it had never liked since it was a puppy. Just as Parker was about to enter the station, Hachi ran up behind him. Seeing Hachi appear with the ball, Parker was surprised and delighted. He stopped and played a game of fetch with Hachi. What shocked him even more was that this time, Hachi quickly returned the ball to his hand. Overjoyed, Parker played happily with Hachi and proudly told Jasjit and Carl that this was the first time Hachi had ever fetched a ball. Ken's old warning was already forgotten. As Parker took the coffee Jasjit handed him and prepared to enter the station again, Hachi pressed close to his side, unwilling to let him go. Parker petted Hachi lovingly and told it they would go home together at 5 o'clock as usual. After that, he took the ball Hachi had brought and went off to work. Left behind, the anxious and helpless Hachi could only watch the train carrying Parker disappear, its brows furrowed in worry. At school, Parker, in high spirits, placed the baseball on the piano and enthusiastically began teaching his students. But then, Parker suddenly felt a sharp pain in his chest. Taking a deep breath, he tried to move to a seat in the audience. Tragically, he collapsed to the floor and never woke up again. That evening, the 5 o'clock train arrived. The people who knew Hachi came out one after another and greeted it warmly. But the face it was waiting for never appeared again. Hachi lay in the flower bed, its eyes full of worry. As night fell, it was already 9 p.m. Even Jasjit had packed up and said goodbye to Hachi. Just then, a pair of headlights caught Hachi's attention. The man who got out was Parker's son-in-law, Michael, who came to take Hachi home. That night, Hachi gazed through the crack of the doghouse as usual, but the window that was once filled with laughter and joy no longer showed Parker's figure, only the sound of Kate softly sobbing. Hachi seemed to sense the sadness in the air. With its intelligence, it had already guessed what had happened. Sadness filled Hachi's eyes, and its face seemed to wear more and more grief. The next day, Andy came to Hachi's side. She gently massaged it just like her father used to do, perhaps thinking of her father. Andy's eyes welled up with tears. She told Hachi to wait for her to return, and then turned to leave. At Parker's funeral, all their friends and family gathered to mourn him. Everyone except Hachi. Ken read a prayer for his old friend, his words filled with longing and sorrow. Meanwhile, in front of the train station, Hachi arrived at the flower bed just before 5 o'clock, as always, waiting for that familiar face. It sat upright, carefully watching each face, afraid to miss the gentle smile of Parker. Hachi stayed in this position until late at night. The station lights dimmed, the vendors packed up and left, but Hachi still hadn't seen its master return. The bitter cold night wind blew, and snowflakes danced in the air. Hachi's fur, covered in snow, shimmered in the darkness. Carl, no longer indifferent, calmed himself and walked up to Hachi, squatting down in front of it.
You don't have to wait anymore. He's not coming back.
Hachi didn't understand why its master no longer appeared. Perhaps it would never understand the concept of death. It only knew that the happiest moment of its day was hearing the distant train whistle that meant Parker was coming home. It believed that as long as it arrived at the station before 5 o'clock, its master would come out smiling, and it would once again fall into his warm embrace. That day, when its master said goodbye, he had said they would meet again at 5 o'clock. That was the reason for Hachi's unwavering devotion. Kate could no longer bear the emptiness of the house without her husband. She packed her things and sold the home full of memories. Hachi, being taken away by Andy, looked back reluctantly. Standing in the cold wind, Kate met its gaze. Her face no longer showed its former happiness, only visible sadness remained. Through the rear window of the car, Hachi watched the house where it had lived with Parker for so long. From that moment on, it had lost its true home. Andy built a cozy little wooden house for Hachi in her yard, but Hachi remained listless, lying there in gloom. One day, just as Michael stepped through the front door, an unexpected scene quietly unfolded. The once melancholy Hachi suddenly seized the moment the door opened and dashed out without hesitation. Its steps were full of determination and urgency, as if an irresistible force was driving it forward. Andy came outside when she heard the commotion. She calmly watched her husband chase after Hachi, as if she had long known this day would come. The distance between Michael and Hachi grew wider and wider until Hachi's figure slowly disappeared into the snowy landscape. Even Michael's voice eventually faded into the forest. Hachi crossed the thickly snow-covered tracks and ran into an empty tunnel. Panting, it sat down to rest for a moment before continuing on. At a junction where two tracks crossed, Hachi stopped. Surrounded by endless snow and tracks stretching into the distance, Hachi seemed lost. In that moment, its earlier determination and courage were replaced by confusion. Exhausted, Hachi finally found a bit of peace by curling up next to an abandoned railway track. It huddled close to the cold rails, slowly closed its eyes, and drifted into sleep. When it woke again, a train sped past, shaking the ground. Wide awake, Hachi once again set off to search for its master. Perhaps guided by past memories, Hachi ran back to the small town where it had once lived. It happily dashed past the familiar corners it had walked countless times with Parker and ran back to the house that had already been sold. But the moment it stepped into the yard, Hachi was startled by strangers. This was no longer its home. At that moment, Hachi seemed to remember its promise to Parker and ran toward the train station. When it arrived, the clock read 4:55. The vendors saw Hachi and sighed. Even Jasjit, who used to complain about dogs, happily fed Hachi some treats. Andy and Michael soon arrived by car. Andy gently embraced Hachi and took it home. She prepared a delicious meal for Hachi, but it had no appetite. Suddenly, Hachi heard a distant train whistle and anxiously ran to the fence. Turning back, it looked at its master with eyes full of hope and longing. Andy understood Hachi's sincere heart. With tearful eyes, she poured out her feelings to Hachi.
I want you to stay here with us. If you have to go, that's okay too.
After speaking, Andy opened the gate of the fence. Hachi gently licked her hand, as if thanking her and saying goodbye. Hachi took off running once again. Even the pouring rain couldn't stop its determined steps. When Jasjit saw Hachi again, he wasn't surprised. He simply greeted it as usual. From then on, Hachi no longer had a warm home. That small flower bed became its resting place. Every day it rose early and stayed at the flower bed. When it got hungry, it would go to nearby shops to beg for food. At night, after Jasjit packed up his stall, Hachi would return to the abandoned tracks to sleep. One day, Hachi encountered a white poodle at the station. Its well-groomed fur stood in stark contrast to Hachi's dirty, matted coat. Hachi watched as the poodle's owner affectionately called to their pet, and envy slowly spread across its face. Once, Parker had called to it the same way, doting, gentle, and full of love. Now, it was just a stray dog waiting for a master who would never return. At that moment, a reporter came into the station office asking about Hachi. He said he had heard many stories about Hachi and wanted to write an article about this touching tale for the newspaper. He then took a photo of Hachi. Hachi's story soon spread around the world. People sent food and money, and Carl at the station took on the responsibility of caring for Hachi. Parker's friend Ken also saw Hachi's story in the newspaper. He came to the station to visit Hachi, and at that moment, Jasjit happened to be feeding Hachi with its bowl. Jasjit and Ken exchanged a few words. He told Ken that the shopkeepers around the station had all witnessed Hachi's day-after-day wait. This love that transcended life and death had already melted everyone's hearts. Jasjit no longer cared about his old attitude of only wanting to make money and not wanting a dog. He refused Ken's offer of money and repeatedly assured him that everyone would look after Hachi together. Perhaps because they came from the same country, Ken seemed to understand Hachi's heart at that moment. He gently spoke to Hachi in Japanese.
バカもう帰ってこないんだよ。ここで待ちたいなら待てばいい。そうしたいんだろ。だったら長生きしてくれよ、ハチ。
Under the sunlight, the expression on Hachi's face appeared even more determined. Ken had once said that once an Akita chose someone, it would never change. Days and nights passed, the seasons changed, and year after year, Hachi waited at the little flower bed. The leaves behind it turned from green to fallen, while Hachi's silent vigil continued through the endless cycle of time. Time left its marks on Hachi's face as well. 10 years passed in the blink of an eye. Kate returned to the town. She walked past the theater where she had once poured her passion, and past the house where she and her husband had shared countless memories. Finally, she came to her long-missed husband's grave, gently caressing the words etched on the stone. By chance, Ken also ran into Kate. They remarked on how quickly time had passed. As they walked to the station together, Kate looked back and saw a familiar figure. She quickly ran toward the flower bed, standing in disbelief before Hachi.
Oh, you will think you're still waiting. It's all right. Could I wait with you for the next train?
Kate had never imagined that a simple promise her husband had once casually made would lead Hachi to wait alone through wind and rain for 10 long years. Moved, she hugged Hachi and wept, and even Jasjeet, watching this emotional reunion, couldn't help but wipe away his tears. But Hachi still did not go home with Kate. It chose to continue wandering alone. At home, Kate and her grandson Ronnie reminisced about Hachi and all the moments it had shared with their family. As a heavy snowstorm fell, the now aged Hachi seemed to sense that its life was nearing its end. It dragged its weary body to the flower bed in front of the station and slowly closed its eyes. At that moment, all its memories with Parker flashed before it, like a movie. In a daze, Hachi seemed to return to the night when it first met Parker. Under the warm yellow light, Parker, wearing a scarf, walked toward it, calling its name. Hachi finally leapt into Parker's warm embrace once more. Content, Hachi peacefully closed its eyes. Its 10 years of waiting had now transformed into a staircase to heaven. At the end of that staircase, Parker and Hachi would one day be reunited. Hachi's story was shared by Ronnie with his classmates. He told them that even though he had never met his grandfather, he had learned the most precious lesson. Never forget those you have loved. That is the true meaning of loyalty. At the end of the story, Ronnie also got a puppy named Hachi, meaning that another seed of bittersweet love had quietly been planted. The story of loyal Hachi comes from a real event. It has touched the softest parts of countless hearts and brought many to tears. This faithful Akita devoted its life to showing what true, selfless love and devotion really mean. It was not just a dog, but a guardian of memory. In Hachi's world, no matter how much time passed, it would always wait for the figure that would never return. Hachi's story is not only the highest tribute to loyalty and devotion, but also a testament to the emotional bonds that transcend time. It is love that makes memory eternal, preventing it from being lost in the river of time. Death is not the end of life. Forgetting is. As long as there is love in your heart and you remember those you love, they will always live on with you. Never forget those you love. Keep pursuing love and memories that never fade, and continue forward on life's journey.